My name is Rudy Daniels. This evening we're going to talk about Columbus, and it was really at the request of the Grand Knight several months ago as to why Columbus is maligned, why people don't want to hear about Columbus, that he's a bad guy and all that stuff. And here we are, Knights of Columbus. Let's look at the background first. Columbus lived at the time of the Renaissance, sometimes called the Quattrocento in Italy. And at the time of the Renaissance, there was indeed economic and cultural development, a period which the world had not seen since 5th century Athens, and perhaps that we have not seen since. The time of Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo da Vinci, names I'm sure that are familiar to you. At the same time, where Columbus was born in Genoa, it was a major trading city and a city of active mariners and shipbuilding and so forth. And with that, at that time, around 1500, Europe had engaged in a wanderlust, that is, exploring, interest in different things that had not occurred to them for centuries. Yet at the same time, Western Europe was undergoing a great threat. And that threat came from the invasion of the Muslim Turks out of the Balkans into Eastern Europe. And this invasion had people scared, including the popes at the time, to the point that they thought that they would be overrun by this non-Christian group, indeed a group that wanted to destroy Christianity. And this was also a period just before the Reformation, and that is the division of the various denominations that we know and hear about today, starting with Martin Luther, going on to John Calvin, and then some others. So Christopher Columbus was born in this atmosphere in 1451 in Genoa. His father was a wool weaver, and he worked in his father's shop from time to time. He was named Christopher, perhaps most appropriately, after Saint Christopher, indeed the patron of travelers. He was the eldest of 5 children. He had little schooling, although he was able to read and write both in Latin and Spanish. And as we're going to see, he had great knowledge of sailing and of the known world at the time. From all accounts, apparently he had a dreamy youth, and I guess that dreamy youth led to his great discoveries. He caught rides as a teenager, a young person, on ships traveling in and out of Genoa as much as possible. And at one point, at the age of 19 or 20, he actually joined a group to fight the Barbary pirates who began to harass shipping off the coast of Africa. So he even had some military experience. He later sailed on a convoy to England, and at that time his ships actually sank, and he clung to an oar to swim safely to shore. And then in 1477 he traveled to Iceland via Ireland. So he was quite an accomplished mariner, even in his youth. When he returned to Italy after these travels, he and his brother Bartholomew opened up a chart shop that is doing maps for sailors and so forth. Yet he longed for the sea. And he later took a trip off the coast of Africa, that is the west coast of Africa, down as far as to what was determined to be the equator. And I want to mention that most sailors at this time believed that the world was round. So this thing about the world being flat, yes, maybe by most people, but those who are in the know and navigators had the idea that the world was round. And it's at this time, those travels down towards the equator, that Columbus had the idea that perhaps we can reach India or Japan or China by sailing west. He also corresponded with one Paolo Toscanelli, who was also a geographer and well-versed in charts. And here came about a misconception, and that is, according to Toscanelli, and then later Columbus's configurations, that Japan was approximately 3,000 miles west of Portugal, or perhaps 2,400 miles west of the Canary Islands. Now, his estimates were way off, because Japan was really 11,000 miles away to sail west. Upon returning to Spain, he married, and to Portugal, he married a Portuguese woman, Filipa Perestrello. He had one child by her, Diego, and she died when Diego was still a child. Yet during these years, he believed that if he had 3 ships, that he could reach the Indies by sailing west. And his dream was to become the governor of all these conquered lands and to attain the rank of admiral, which would be inherited by Diego and any future children. In 1482, he presented this idea to King John II of Portugal, and he was outrightly refused. In the meantime, he sailed down the African coast, gaining valuable nautical information. And in 1485, he tried again. His brother Bartholomew actually went to England and spoke with King Henry VII about sponsoring such a voyage, and also King Charles VIII of France to do the same. And Christopher got caught up, I guess you could say, in the politics of the time and was refused. It's during this period that he put his son Diego into a monastery in Spain that was headed by the friar Juan Perez, who was also a counselor to Queen Isabella of the newly established Kingdom of Spain when Castile and Aragon came together, Ferdinand and Isabella in their marriage, in this new country from Spain. At first, the King and Queen of Spain rejected his idea, but it's probably through the intercession of Friar Perez, Juan Perez, that Isabella took a liking to Columbus, who was willing to hear them. Besides that, in the year 1492, Spain became a complete whole when they were able to rout the Muslims from the south of Spain, where they had been settled in the state of Granada. Isabella granted Columbus's wish of 3 ships: the Niña, with a crew of 22, the Pinta, a crew of 26, and the Santa Maria, with a crew of 39. I'm sure you've heard this. Columbus sailed the Ocean Blue in 1492 on the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. Well, yes, true. They used crude instruments of the time, and indeed his crew was really quite motley. They were good sailors, but they were not really the top-notch or best people of the time, at least recognized. They sailed on the 3rd of August, 1492, from the Spanish port of Paolos. They had to stop in the Canary Islands for a few days for ship repairs, particularly rudder repairs. When they were about 3 weeks sailing west, out of sight of land, they came about the problem of insufficient supplies. They would have barely enough if they turned around and returned to Spain. He therefore held council with his crew and decided to sail on for 3 more days. They were a bit encouraged because they had seen some wood floating on the sea, and they had seen some birds. That was a sign that land was somewhere about. And it was on the early morning, we estimate probably 2 a.m. of October the 12th, 1492, that the crew finally saw land, and is known as landing on San Salvador. And today, San Salvador is recognized as Watling Island, a possession of the United States, on the eastern side of the Bahamas. He saw natives, and given their appearance, Columbus believed that he had landed on the islands described by Marco Polo, as the islands just to the south and around India. So he called the inhabitants Indians, a term which lasts down to today. He later then set sail to the other islands he knew where they were about, landed in Cuba, and then further on to Hispaniola to try to find a ruler or emperor. At that point, the Santa Maria was wrecked. So he left 40 men to be in the future Santo Domingo on Hispaniola to build a settlement, perhaps will be called a fort, and to look for gold. After all, that's why Ferdinand and Isabella sponsored the voyage, was to look for gold. Upon returning to Spain in the Pinta, in the Niña began to sink. And Columbus took his notes and accounts of his voyage, put it into a cask, and threw it overboard, because he did not know whether he would make it back to Spain, and perhaps future explorers would find that cask and indeed have his notes for posterity. And it's quite interesting that if that cask were ever found today, it would probably be worth an absolute fortune. But I have not heard of anyone finding that cask, or maybe someone found it and didn't know what it was. In sailing back to Spain, he landed in the Azores. And no one would believe his story. The Azores were a Portuguese series of islands to the west of Portugal, and no one would believe him. They accused him of being a liar. They said he was really a poacher instead. And at one point, they tried to waylay him and arrest him, and he and his group simply put up a fight and even threatened to wreck the town or village. And that was, they intercepted him, believe it or not, on his way to Mass. Well, he was successful and was able to return to Palos, Spain in March of 1413. He received a grand reception in Barcelona and was granted the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea and Viceroy of the Indies. In other words, he became the governor of the Indies. And he was directed, the king and queen, to plan yet another voyage to the Indies, again to try to find India, Japan, and the other areas and try to seek gold. This time he sailed from Cadiz with 1,000 colonists, including priests, to convert the Indians to Christianity. On the second voyage, he sailed about around St. Kitts, St. Croix, the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. When he landed on Hispaniola, he found that all of the settlers he had left there were killed by the Indians. There was no explanation as to what happened. So he then went to Jamaica and then returned to Spain in 1496. Everyone was disappointed at the end of the second voyage, again, because they could not find gold. Yet, the other side of this issue is that with the priests and settlers there, they built the first cathedral in the New World. It began its building, and that cathedral still exists today. Mass is still said there in the first church, Catholic Church founded in the New World. I've been there. I've seen the cathedral. It is just a magnificent structure, blending Catholicism, traditions of Western Europe with the islands of the Caribbean. It is absolutely magnificent to behold. He then went on a third voyage with three ships. This time he took a more southerly route, and he landed at Trinidad and eventually Venezuela. He returned to Hispaniola, and there, among the settlers, a riot was going on. And one of the leaders of the riot actually captured Columbus, and he returned him to Spain in chains. So at the end of this third voyage, he was actually a prisoner. Isabella, upon his return, Queen Isabella had him released, and then she sent him back with 1,500 more settlers and clergy. On his fourth voyage, with 4 ships in 1502, he took his illegitimate son, Ferdinand, with him, or at least he recognized the boy as his son. and he was to look for that passage to India. In other words, to get through these islands off the coast of India and get to India proper. From Santo Domingo, he sailed to what we would call Central America today, Panama, Honduras, trying to find this passage to the west. He had heard of the ocean to the west, which of course is now what we call the Pacific Ocean, and he wanted to start a colony in Costa Rica. But battles with Native Americans prohibited that. He then sailed to Jamaica, where he had ship problems, and he was actually marooned on that island on to 1504, where he was found and was returned to Spain. In fact, he got along well with the inhabitants of Jamaica because he predicted an eclipse, and they thought this was really incredible that someone could predict an eclipse, and he did so. He died in Valladolid, Spain, on the 20th of May, 1506. He is known to have suffered from severe arthritis, what we would call arthritis today, and he died in near poverty, in spite of his titles and his supposed viceroy of the areas discovered. He died in what we would call poverty. We also know that Columbus prayed several times a day, and he attended Mass whenever possible. And quite interesting, as determined as the sculptor and painter Michelangelo was to do his work, Columbus believed that God intended him to make discoveries, to bring people to Christianity. That was his mission. He believed that that was his task given by God. There's an argument over where his remains are settled. Some people argue that they are in Spain, and of course Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic today, built a huge monument to a mausoleum that supposedly contained his remains. Of course, we really are not sure which is the correct place. Some place in Spain, and there are a couple that ask for credit and whatnot. One thing's for sure, Columbus was engaged in the economy of his time. Search for gold was part of the mercantile economy that Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand were engaged in. He was to find gold. Gold was the way to wealth, as the world at that time was changing from a land-based economy in the Middle Ages to a money-based economy in the 15th and 16th centuries. He was also engaged in politics. Obviously, he had to get his ships, money, and crew in order to make the voyage to the New World.